Welcome to meeting number 88 of the Standing Committee on International Trade. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. I'm sorry, what don't we have? Oh, okay. Do I need to start again, or are we okay? Yeah, we're going to add the 40 minutes on to the meeting so that we have a full hour with our witnesses. Okay, let's start this again. Okay, do I need to hit the hammer again? Okay. I call the meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 88 of the Standing Committee on International Trade. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders, and therefore members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I need to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those online, please mute yourself when you are not speaking. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. If any technical issues arise, please inform me immediately, as we may need to suspend to ensure interpretation is properly restored before resuming proceedings. I ask all participants to be careful when handling the earpieces in order to prevent feedback. Given the fact that we were delayed by 40 minutes of starting up our meeting, and it's important for us to hear from our witnesses, I would suggest to the committee that we continue on, as Mr. Baldinelli suggested, with the additional 40 minutes. So we'll have an hour from 20 to 12. So our meeting will go till 20 to 1. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, October 17th, 2023, the committee is continuing its study on the 2023 strike at the Port of Vancouver. We have with us today Barry Iden, Associate Professor of Sociology from McGill University by video conference. From the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, Robin Gee, Vice President, Deputy Leader, Government Relations. Welcome back for a second time. And from the Canada West Foundation, Carlo Dade, Director, Centre for Trade and Trade Infrastructure. Welcome all. We will start with opening remarks and then proceed with rounds of questions for Mr. Gee. You have for up to 5 minutes, and I turn the floor over to you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, honourable members. Thanks for having me back again today. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce is the country's largest business association with an active network of over 400 chambers of commerce and boards of trade, representing nearly 200,000 businesses of all sizes in all sectors and regions of our country. As a trading nation, our infrastructure matters more to Canada than many other countries around the world. In fact, 2 of every $3 that Canada makes relies on moving goods. This is significantly higher than the OECD average of just over 50%. When Canadian businesses can't import or export goods reliably, we undermine our ability to grow our economy. Our West Coast is Canada's largest gateway to the world, handling over $800 million worth of cargo, from agri-foods and potash to critical minerals and household necessities every single day. That accounts for a quarter of Canada's total trade. This summer, we saw over 35 days of uncertainty and disruption to our West Coast gateways, including Vancouver and Prince Rupert, that caused major delays for Canadian businesses in virtually every sector across the country. I'll repeat that, 25% of our total trade stopped. This meant that Canadian potash had to cut production and sales during the strike, causing those who rely on Canada for fertilizer had to look elsewhere to ensure they could continue to grow crops. This meant that businesses looking for replacement parts to fix machinery were delayed, causing production to slow or stop. It meant that fruits and vegetables that we bring to Canada were left to rot in containers as opposed to being on shelves for consumers to enjoy. Plain and simple, it meant that goods were going to become more expensive for Canadian and fuel inflation. I will stress to the committee that the damage from a strike does not take place in the days where workers are picketing. Businesses need certainty. They need to know that if they're importing or exporting goods, that they will get where they need to go when they need to be there. If not, suppliers will go elsewhere, and it is not guaranteed that it will return. When looking at Canada's record, many of our trading partners are beginning to question if Canada can reliably get goods to market. We saw this shortly after the West Coast port strikes, with the St. Lawrence Seaway, and with uncertainty that is looming at the Port of Montreal. I must state that the Canadian Chamber respects the right to collective bargaining. We believe sincerely that the best deals are reached at the table, but when negotiations break down and meaningful bargaining is no longer possible, the Canadian business community expects the government to show leadership and act in the best interest of the country. The Canadian Chamber called on the government to use all of the tools it currently had in its toolbox to prevent a strike and then to solve it. We applauded the Minister of Labour for directing the senior mediator to recommend terms of a settlement to reach a fair deal. But unfortunately, we did not see that action until nearly 2 weeks into the port strike, when significant damage to the Canadian economy and Canada's reputation had already taken place, and that dragged on for further weeks while the union failed to ratify the agreement. The review initiated by the Minister of Labour under Section 106 of the Canadian Labour Code is a key opportunity to do this, to equip the government with more tools to be able to avoid labour disruptions while protecting public interest. We need to make sure the government has the ability to force the two sides together in form of binding resolution. We can't have the government waiting on the sidelines for 2 weeks before action is taken. Canada's supply chains are only as strong as the weakest link. Government can't solve all of our supply chain issues, but it must look to enable policies that will enable trade, strengthening our supply chains. Less than a month ago, the Minister of Labour told Canadians that our credibility as a trading nation depends on stable operation of our supply chains. We must do everything we can to preserve that stability. We couldn't agree more. However, the introduction of Bill C-58, which aims to prohibit the use of replacement workers during strikes, suggests that the government actually wants to move away from preserving stability. It is in fact doubling down on Canada being seen as an unreliable and unstable trading partner. We need our leaders to engage in an honest dialogue that will provide our government with the tools it needs to address our labor challenges while allowing employers and employees to bargain in the way they should. For the sake of the economy, I would urge all parties to vote against this legislation. Thank you for your time. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gee. On to Mr. Idland, please. I invite you to speak to the committee for up to 5 minutes, please.
Great. Can you hear me?
Sure.
Yes. Okay. Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to speak with you today about the 2023 strike at the Port of Vancouver. Bonjour et merci de m'avoir invité pour partager mes propos sur la grève des débardeurs au port de Vancouver l'été dernier. My name is Barry Idland, and I'm an associate professor of sociology at McGill University, where I've taught since 2015. My expertise is in the study of labor movements, politics, and policy. I've published extensively on the formation and development of Canadian and US labor regimes, trying to understand why two policy regimes that started out so similar evolved along different paths, with Canada protecting labor rights over time while the US allowed them to erode. So far, the committee has received detailed reports from many witnesses about the devastating impacts that the 2-week strike starting on July 1st had on Canadian businesses, large and small. What the committee has heard less of is how we got to July 1st. But that's important because we need to understand strikes as part of the collective bargaining process, not just a specific event to deal with on its own. As you know, negotiations for the port agreement began on February 16th. After more than a month, on March 20th, the ILWU declared impasse and asked for a conciliator. Then there were 60 days of conciliation. Then there was a 21-day cooling off period. Then there was a strike vote. Then the ILWU gave a 72-hour strike notice. And then, finally, on July 1st, workers went on strike. So what we see is that there are plenty of mechanisms already in place in the collective bargaining process to reduce the likelihood of strikes. That's what conciliation and cooling off periods are for. It's also important to recognize that workers themselves rarely want to go on strike. They go on strike because they have to, because it's the last resort after all other attempts to get their employers to address their concerns have failed. So the question we need to ask is why, given all these mechanisms already in place, did we see a strike at the BC ports? Why did the process break down? Here, ILW President Rob Ashton's testimony before this committee earlier can provide some clues. As you recall, Mr. Ashton noted that the BCMEA has shifted its bargaining strategy since 2010. Instead of engaging in meaningful negotiations, it has dragged its feet while waiting for government intervention to impose a settlement in the name of preventing economic catastrophe. And the BCMEA is not alone in this. Rather, they are part of what scholars Leo Panitch and Donald Swartz call Canada's regime of permanent exceptionalism. Under that regime, Canadian governments and employers consistently declare their support for collective bargaining rights while repeatedly finding reasons to circumvent those rights just this once. As a result, Canadian federal and provincial governments have been some of the heaviest users of back-to-work legislation among G7 countries and the top violator of international labor rights in that group. Indeed, between 2002 and 2019, Canada accounted for 54% of complaints of violations of labor rights filed with the ILO's Committee on Freedom of Association against G7 countries. So while each individual intervention might seem reasonable, as it might here with the BC ports, over time, these interventions have a corrosive effect on the collective bargaining process. That's because repeated interventions reduce employers' incentive to bargain, since they can just sit and wait for governments to impose settlements or use the threat of government intervention to get their way. It is not healthy to have a knee-jerk reaction of resorting to government intervention after the fact, rather than committing to the process. If we're serious about maintaining a robust system of collective bargaining, we must have a system that includes strong incentives to reach negotiated agreements backed by a meaningful right to strike. There's a reason that the Supreme Court described the right to strike as an indispensable component of workers' collective bargaining rights. Trying to solve labor disputes through ad hoc government intervention may solve the short-term problem, but creates bigger problems down the road. Thank you for your time, and this concludes my statement.
Thank you very much, sir. On to Mr. Dade for up to 5 minutes, please.
There. Merci, Madame la Présidente, membres du comité. Thank you for the invitation to join you from Treaty 7 territory here in Alberta. The Canada West Foundation has worked for 50 years to ensure a strong West in a strong Canada. For the last decade, we have devoted particular attention to in-depth study of Canada's trade infrastructure, the system and assets that move goods, people, money, and ideas to and from markets. The committee has heard much about the importance of trade, the Chamber's 66% figure, but less well known in Canada. We understand the importance of trade, but less well known is the perception globally of our trade infrastructure. This has come up repeatedly in testimony during the committee. It's been raised as a tangential issue, but it is in fact essential to understanding the significance of the strike and in understanding and evaluating any potential responses. So very quickly, some of the indicators on the plummeting perception of the quality of Canada's trade infrastructure that has initiated our work and driven and given us some impetus in what we do. The World Economic Forum's Global Competitiveness Survey had Canada in the top 10 globally for trade infrastructure a decade ago. The last time the World Economic Forum ran the numbers, we were 32nd, right above Azerbaijan. The World Bank's Logistics Performance Index, which looks at a country's top 5 trading partners, found that our trading partners, their perception had declined, of our trade infrastructure had declined precipitously in recent times. Domestically, Westac's survey, Compass survey of Canadian stakeholders has consistently found that worries about the quality of the management of our trade infrastructure has ranked as a top concern. And we hear this abroad. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Japan has backed our study and our work, citing the perceptions in Japan and the worries in Japan about the quality of our trade infrastructure. Why is this important when thinking about the impact and the significance of the strike? Other countries, other trade systems, other economies have strikes, they have blockades, they have environmental issues that impact trade. The difference in Canada is not the perception, but the knowledge of our trading partners that we do not have what every other major trading exporting nation has, what the other G7 countries have, what most of the OECD has, which is a system, a permanent system and institutions to conduct ongoing analysis, collection of data, and turning that analysis and information into information that can be used to inform decisions by all stakeholders. You heard Transport Canada mention that in response to the strike, they rushed to set up something like this, something our competitors have had. So the issue for us in Canada is that when we do have a blockade or we do have a strike at the port, we start from a position with our customers, with our competitors, where we are already in a hole, where there are already doubts about our ability to manage the system. And therefore, things like strikes have a greater impact in Canada. In response, based on research that we've done looking at international best practice, we've designed a system to be able to enable Canada to adopt what our competitors have, a national trade infrastructure planning system that's permanent, that is in partnership with the private sector. This call has been backed by the private sector. The Chamber is the Business Council of Canada and others. It was also backed by the premiers. This summer at the Council of the Federation in Winnipeg, all 13 of the nation's premiers issued a call for Canada to move towards national trade infrastructure planning. In terms of responses to the strike, you can whack the current mold that's popped up in trying to deal with the strike and legislation. But if you don't deal with the underlying systemic issues, any moves you take will be starting from a position of weakness and will not have credibility abroad. So with that, I'll conclude my remarks and note that I'm also happy to take questions about the first question the committee had about the World Bank Container Index study. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dade. On to 6 minutes for Mr. Baldinelli, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for our witnesses for joining us today. Mr. Guy, I'm going to start with the Canadian Chamber. And in your comments, you talked about the notion of $2 out of every $3 that Canada makes relies on us moving goods and doing so efficiently. And, you know, the Port of Vancouver strike had a direct economic impact on Canada. We're talking not only about $800 million in shipments a day. I mean, I think it was 10.7 billion just in total shipments. As you mentioned, 25% of our trade was stopped. We had a previous witness, David Adams of the Global Auto Manufacturers, I believe. He had mentioned about the strike added about a 60-day period or window to additional delays in the supply chain. And I think that was verified by other witnesses who said it kind of backed things up by about 3 weeks in total. So, I mean, the whole supply chain was impacted, and I don't think there's an economic figure that we can put on that. And then there's also the reputational damage that was done to Canada. We've heard from our witnesses that businesses are looking for certainty, and this strike, if anything, has led them to question Canada and the use of certain ports. I mean, then we had a strike at the St. Lawrence Seaway as well, and now there's the potential of a strike at the Port of Montreal. So you had talked about the government and the notion of leadership. And is there a way, if you can elaborate perhaps on how the government can get involved, I think, earlier on in the process to assist, mindful of the fact of trying to balance the interests of both business and of labor, but how can the government get into the process earlier? I mean, if you look at the timeline, the employers asked to negotiate going back to the winter of 2022, and it still resulted in a strike July 1st. How can we bridge those differences in between in a way that we can get settlements to avoid this?
Yeah, so thank you very much for the question. I think we started talking about the possibility of a work stoppage on Canada's west coast, and I'll kind of stress that it's important to mention the Port of Vancouver, but also the other ports as well that were affected during this. But we raised this about 7 months before the strike happened, so about this time last year. I think when we talk about leadership, what we want to see is really the need to be addressing this before there's a work stoppage or a lockout.
Mr. Guy, would you step back a little bit from the microphone? Translation is finding it a little bit too loud.
How's
Thank
that?
you very much.
I think it's important for us to take a look at not just before a strike, but also after, to take a look and review actually what's taking place. And I know the government's doing this with the Section 106 review. We really need to make sure that the minister has the tools that he needs to solve these. We don't want just the minister sitting on the sidelines during a work stoppage. We really want him to drive an outcome, bring parties together, force a deal, or hold them to the table without stopping a strike or a lockout.
Now, Mr. Guy, thank you for your comments and some of your suggestions. Have you shared those directly with the government, to the Minister of Labor directly? I mean, who's undertaking a review currently, but the government's also established a supply chain office. And perhaps they're looking for suggestions on what it can do. Have you made any suggestions to them as well?
So we've responded to the government's open consultation on Section 106. I'll say we've welcomed the review. We've made some suggestions. We've suggested some questions for the two co-chairs doing the review to take a look at. I guess where my concern a little bit is just the size of the scope that they're taking to look at. I'll also kind of say it was a little bit confusing that the government tabled C-58 anti-replacement worker legislation before the results of the review. So I think that's a little bit of concern on our side. But yes, we've raised just through the formal consultation mechanism.
Now, Madam Chair, how much time would I have left?
109.
Mr. Dade, if I could go to you and some of the work of the Canada West Foundation, and you had mentioned about the Container Port Performance Index, for example, Vancouver, the Port of Vancouver ranks currently 347th out of 348 ports, and that study was done by S&P Global Market Intelligence for the World Bank Group. Now, you've got some suggestions in regards to the whole issue of infrastructure. Has the government approached your organization, for example, or have, to your knowledge, approached, say, for example, S&P Global Market Intelligence to get their input on maybe doing an examination? How is it that the Canadian government can examine things such as our port so that we can make improvements to our infrastructure to avoid some of the issues that we're now facing?
Madam Chair, I thank the member for the question. Two quick notes on the port study. It's a really complex undertaking, what S&P and the World Bank have done, and you really need to have an in-depth explanation. The ranking requires some nuance, but in terms of the response, interestingly, when Australia first got the World Bank report, they approached S&P and the consultant and engaged them and produced a study working with them on how to address issues found. Canada hasn't done that. I've talked extensively with the consultant who developed the methodology and who runs the study. And as of July, Canada hadn't done what Australia had done, which was reach out and approach them. So that's certainly an area, low-hanging fruit, where we could take advantage of work that's being done by the World Bank and S&P, 5 years worth of work to try and improve performance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dade. On to Mr. Arya for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Dade, welcome back to the committee. I did read your article in June 2023 in Global Mail on this issue of the world rankings. On the question of the quality of trade infrastructure, quickly I want to know, there are two components, one internal to port authorities and second external. How much of this problem is due to the internal issues of the port authorities?
So that work would have to be done in terms of a deeper analysis of the ports. The World Bank Standard & Poor's study has micro data at the port that you can use to make a judgment in that regard. I would say that the issues, though, the larger issues are systemic. When you look at the fall in rankings for Vancouver, part of the issue or
Today,
dwell.
I'm sorry, I got few more questions, limited time.
Okay.
Questions to you. In your article, you did mention two things, the funding and planning. The funding side, I think the federal government, as you may know, that we have committed quite a large amount of funding under our trade and transportation infrastructure funding, about $10 billion. The funding is there, but why it has not been used yet, and which are the points, which are the responsibility points, I should say, why it is not get translated into a better investment in infrastructure?
First, I don't think anyone from the private sector, any analyst would agree that that's enough money. The government has consistently put more money into non-productive assets. So trade infrastructure is how we fund housing. It's how we fund education. It's how we fund healthcare. So certainly the money that goes to trade infrastructure is not concomitant with its importance, nor is it concomitant with need. Second, without the ability to do national planning, we do not know where to make investments that will improve fluidity and functioning of the entire national integrated system. So more money is needed, but it's not sufficient. Without national planning, we lack the ability to do what Australia, the UK, the US, and others do, make investments that are shovel worthy, not just shovel ready, which is our current approach.
And again, in the article, you did mention about Manitoba Premier's long-term plan, creating a long-term national trade infrastructure and transportation corridor planning. Any movement on that, have you heard?
So this was the Council of the Federation, so all 13 premiers. Premier Stephenson gave some leadership, but it's a continuing resolution by the Council. We have not heard any response from the federal government from the call from the premiers or the call from the private sector, the Business Council, the Chamber, manufacturers and exporters, the Construction Association. There's a long list of private sector organizations that have aligned with this call. We haven't heard a response from the federal government to the premiers nor to the private sector.
We have signed a lot of free trade agreements with so many countries across the world, but we don't have free trade within Canada itself. There's no free trade amongst the provinces. How much of this, the provincial responsibilities cause this trade transport infrastructure problems?
So lack of alignment with jurisdictions along economic corridors has been an issue. There's been improvement. The prairie provinces, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, have signed a memorandum of understanding to do what's called for in the national planning, cooperate on data collection, cooperate on analysis, cooperate on joint planning. So there is one sign of hope in Canada. It's on the prairies where that work is being tested.
And there are two specific initiatives, specific funds, the Asia Pacific Gateway and Corridor Initiative and National Trade Corridors Fund. Do you know any movement on those things?
So the government is conducting a review of the NCTF, the corridor fund. That review certainly can go a long way to correcting issues, but it has to be, again, part of a move to national planning. These are systemic issues, and unless you engage in a long-term, permanent, systemic response, you're going to have suboptimal outcomes. Our competitors have moved to do this. We have not. So until we address that issue, everything else will be stopgap, last through the election cycle, and will be suboptimal.
Last question, Mr. Dade. You mentioned systemic problems several times. So even if there is something like let's privatize the ports, I don't think that will solve any problems, right? Because the systemic is entire trade infrastructure.
Correct. You may solve problems in the short term, but in the longer term, you have not dealt with the systemic issues. You are at a comparative disadvantage against jurisdictions that compete with us, that have done this, and you're, again, getting suboptimal outcomes. And the evidence on this is clear. International best practice, cross-country comparisons. The decade of research that we and others have done has shown this very clearly.
Thank you, Mr. Dade. Thank you very much. On to Madame LaRouche for 6 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So for these questions, I'm replacing my colleague, Mr. Savard-Tremblay. So I would like to ask Mr. Edlin. Mr. Edlin, during the strike, a number of economic actors, including the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, who's present here, asked the government to put in special legislation to force return to work. But this did not happen. But however, we know that Canada has a poor record with regard to forcing workers to return through special legislation. Could you talk about the impact of special legislation on the rights of workers?
Oui, merci beaucoup. Alors, ce qui est
Yes, thank you.
important,
I think what's important to know here is that, first of all, Canada, as I said, has an exceptional approach in using legislation. This is not something that's done internationally. We don't see that type of special legislation used as frequently as we do here in Canada. And it's troubling for a healthy labor relations system. When you force laborers to return, you don't resolve the problem that led to the strike. All you're doing is pushing the problem back. And what we learned when we look at the history of the labor relation movement here in Canada is that the government in the 30s and 40s, their response was to limit the right to striking, and that did not work. And it's only after a number of attempts to introduce or to limit rights that we understood that the response was to implement a process to resolve the issues that led to the strike, and not just to suppress the option of going to strike. Now, as our system developed, what we saw was when there were episodes or where there were waves of strikes, the government's response earlier was to reinforce the rights of workers and not to suppress them, because it was learned that it was only by strengthening laborers' rights that we could create a labor system that would work well. All right, thank you, Mr. Edlin. I would like to ask you another question. At the last sitting, we received a speaker who said that one of the sources that led to the strike in Vancouver and in Montreal is the absence of true decision makers at the bargaining table. So do you agree with that, and what are your thoughts on that? Yes, and I would say that that's a consequence of the habit that we have in this country of trying to solve problems with special legislation. Because when we do that, when in that context, incentives for employers or employers are not incentivized to solve issues. They are used to waiting for special legislation. And what we see is that employers have those expectations. And so we don't have decision makers at the table. We have people that are simply sitting there. They don't make the decision because the true decisions are thought to be done later, after a special law or special legislation is imposed. So the existence of special legislation What it does is it hinders solving problems at the negotiating table. Right, perfect. One, the Bloc Québécois has been asked for tabled a bill at the beginning of November. And I would like your comments on that bill. Is it necessary? And if so, why? Yes, I do think it's necessary. I think it's important to avoid special legislation for the same reason. It's because employers have to be incentivized to resolve issues at the negotiating table. If we have the option to go to special legislation, that undermines the power of workers to try to resolve the issues at the negotiating table. It undermines the power relationships at the table. And that's why, if we want to have a healthy labor relations system, we need to respect, if we want to respect the charter rights to negotiate, the right to go on strike, we have to respect these rights. And if you want to respect those rights, we need a system that avoids the use of
Thank you very much. On to Mr.
of these things.
6 minutes, please. Oh, hold on, Ms. Serla, we can't hear you. Can you unplug and replug your headset in, please?
All right. Now, Madam Chair.
I think that's much better. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I was a little bit unplugged there. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to ask Mr. Eidlin. So I really appreciated your testimony at the beginning that talked about how these are not singular events, and how it is important to understand how we get here. And I know that I actually visited some of the workers during the strike in my riding of Port Moody, Coquitlam, and more in Belcarra, and they were talking about this inability to directly negotiate with the employer, that the BCMEA was the intermediary. And I just wonder if you could share, when the Chamber of Commerce talks about all the tools in their toolbox, how is the employer using tools such as BCMEA, and how does it either enhance or undermine the process with workers in negotiating?
Yes, thank you for that. So for starters, I want to say that I think that having employer associations is on its face a good thing. You want to have coordinated systems of bargaining because you want to have coordinated standards across the board. So it's not a good system to have, each employer trying to cut its own deal with the union. So the problem is not a system, the existence of the BCMEA per se. The problem is who's at the table and who has the actual power to make decisions. And so if you have an employer association that actually has real decision-making power and that is familiar with the actual facts on the ground and has the power to actually enter into negotiations with the goal of actually reaching an agreement, then that's a healthy thing. The problem in the case of the BCMEA is, as we heard previously from Mr. Ashton and others, is that they're not sending people with decision-making power to the table. And that, as I said earlier, is because the incentive structure is such that they don't have an incentive to reach an agreement at the bargaining table. So they just need people who serve as placeholders, essentially. And that undermines the overall collective bargaining process. And so that, I guess, I hope that sort of provides an overview of what you're trying to get at.
That's great. Thank you so much. And I think this was also what my Bloc colleague also was interested in, is how is that our decision makers coming to the table in these negotiations? So the goal of this study is to understand the economic impact of the Vancouver port strike. And it seems to me that also involves how it affects families on the ground. If I think about my riding of Port Moody Coquitlam, there was many workers from my riding that were impacted, that were fighting again against the rising cost of rents, the rising cost of homes, the rising costs of food, all of these things. So I wonder if you could just share your thoughts or even recommendations to this committee on how it affects workers when the ports are when negotiation is limited and there is no ability for them to have fair collective bargaining.
Yeah, well, I think in terms of how it affects collective bargaining, when we set these precedents of, okay, we support collective bargaining except when it doesn't work out the way we want it to, then it really undermines workers' leverage, right? And the whole purpose of collective bargaining is to level the playing field, right? That there's the Canadian labor relations system starts from the recognition that there's a structural power imbalance between employers and workers, and that you need a system of collective bargaining to level the playing field. And so what things like return to work legislation, like strike breakers do, is essentially puts the thumb on the scale of the employer. And that undermines the overall system. And like I said earlier, when I was responding to your Bloc colleague, it doesn't, sweeping the problem under the rug doesn't make the problem go away. The problems at the port and the problems that we've seen with in other strikes across the country this year are problems that are affecting a wide swath of Canadians, with wages not keeping up with the cost of living, with housing costs, with automation and how that's going to affect people's jobs. And so what we need is a system of collective bargaining where these issues can be brought out into the open and dealt with in a public forum in a way that can actually address workers' concerns, because just sort of trying to make them go away doesn't actually resolve the problem, and it just only kicks the can down the road.
Thank you for that. And just my last question then, just thinking about workers and thinking about the fact that, there is a resurgent right now of workers coming forward saying that they haven't been compensated fairly. I think about women in the care economy. I think about nurses, frontline workers, those that emergency response, that they haven't been adequately compensated. So when we talk about having a study around, the economy, how do we get a fair voice for workers in studies like this to understand that it also impacts families and people on the ground here in Canada?
Yeah, I think it's crucial that your point here that when we talk about the economy, we can't just talk about numbers on a spreadsheet. The purpose of an economy is, when you talk about what a prosperous society looks like, it has to be a society where prosperity is shared across the entire population. And so we can be developing an economy that's going gangbusters and GDP through the roof. But if that's not actually changing the lives and improving the lives of workers, that's not a healthy economy. And I think we need to understand that that broader vision of the economy is actually what we need to be striving towards, not just what the GDP is looking like.
Madam Chair, is my time up?
It's up. Thank you very much. Mr. Martel, please, for 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame Chair. Merci aux témoins qui sont présents ici.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. I would like to ask a question to Mr. Guy. Mr. Guy, we hear colleagues and other witnesses who have come here saying that ports are not essential, but I would say it's the foundation of our economy. And these strikes can even lead to companies closing and even to suicidal ideation. If someone goes bankrupt, it's a lot. So what do you think when people say that it's not essential?
I think the word essential is always a tricky one, as there's a legal meaning to it, especially when we're talking about essential, an essential federal service. So I would say, as a trading nation who relies on the movement of goods kind of to and from Canada, Yes, our ports are critical to being able to grow our economy. When we're talking about essential federal services, I think it's a little bit of a trickier conversation that we need to have. I think what we really need to do is make sure that the Minister of Labor has the tools that he needs to be able to solve these things, and I'll say solve them before a strike or a lockout.
J'aimerais vous entendre aussi sur.
I'd also like to hear your thoughts on the scabs.
Bien sûr qu'on vient des fois avec ça, là, justement, avec cette
Now,
loi-là.
with the legislation, that often comes up.
J'aimerais vous entendre parler là-dessus.
But I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. So in your view, if there are no scab workers,
C'est quoi les
and if there are scabs,
effets
what is the impact on a strike in your view?
Well, it's a great question, and thank you. I'll say it's a very critical question to be talking about, especially in this context. But I'll kind of make a counter argument to kind of the last questions where it's saying there is a push, the thumb on the scale towards one side or another, and I would say this is doing the exact same thing, pushing it towards the one side. We've seen successive governments work to maintain carefully constructed balance between the employers and employees. The federal government's even their own discussion paper on prohibiting replacement workers concluded that when provinces prohibit replacement workers, it leads to more frequent strikes and lockouts. I also will say the replacement worker conversation, it's awfully misunderstood, I think. We're not talking about somebody like myself going and really running a crane at a port. We're talking about people who are often managers at organizations who are working to keep on the lights. So for example, if there's a rail strike in the country, that could actually impact commuter services in Canada's largest cities. It means that propane might not be able to get to hospitals or homes to heat. It means that grain feed might not get to cattle. So I mean, it's a massive piece that I think is bad policy, and I think it's playing politics with as opposed to good governance or policies.
Merci.
Thank you.
C'est intéressant. Monsieur.
It's interesting. Mr. Enlid, I'm looking at the port infrastructure report, and I would like to know the difference. I'm looking at Japan here. In 2008 and 2009, they were very far and they made a huge amount of progress. And in Canada, the effect was the opposite. So what are the differences between the ports of Japan and Canada, and what has Japan done better, and how did Canada fall so far behind in terms of infrastructure?
Who would you like to answer that question, sir?
Okay.
Monsieur Day.
Excusez-moi,
Monsieur Day.
Ah ouais, désolé, j'écoutais l'autre witness. What's Japan done well? They've done what all of our competitors have. I repeat time and time again, the national planning, the ability to gather data across the integrated supply and production chains, the ability to make investments that are based on data and data informed by decision making. Je m'écoute? Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
So
Yes.
that is the major difference. Time and time again, you see this across the board.
Thank you very much, Mr. Martel. All right, thank you. Madame Fortier, for 5 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Désolée, j'ai
Thank you,
pas.
Madam Chair. I'm sorry, I don't have much of a voice, but I hope that you'll be able to hear me. What interests me right now is the whole question of workers and negotiations. And what I understand from the witnesses is that you seem to all agreement that the best negotiations take place at the table. But what I also understand is that the government needs tools. So, for example, in this type of situation, so that this type of situation does not repeat itself. So I've heard what we shouldn't be doing, but what I haven't heard what we should be doing. So are there any solutions or tools that we should put forward? I still think that C58 is a very important tool, but maybe you have other ideas. And then I'll go to Mr. Adlin to see if he has suggestions of tools that we could use. And the interpreter did not hear where the question was directed. Oh, Mr. Guy.
Thank you very much for the question. I think what we're looking for are tools that will bring parties together. We're looking for really the ability to force a deal or hold them to the table when in advance of a work stoppage. So it's the challenging kind of question is it's not really a one size fits all approach. But some options I think that have been suggested to the government include binding arbitration or cabinet powers to be able to again hold the parties to the table and get a deal done.
Monsieur Edlin, est-ce que vous avez des commentaires?
Mr. Adlin, do you have any comments? Yes, I do. I would say that it's the incentive structure that we have to look at. So what I mean is that we have to create a structure where the incentive is to arrive at an agreement at the negotiating table. And what we see historically is, you know, when I do comparisons between Canada and the United States, it's when government intervenes to limit workers' rights instead of arriving at an agreement. That is why, in general, we see that the labor relations structure in Canada is better than what we see in the States. There's a desire to limit or to force employers to negotiate. But now with special legislation and the use of strike breakers, we're getting away from that tendency or that trend that worked for a number of years. So I think we have to look at that question. How can we create incentives so that employers arrive at an agreement at the negotiating table? Mr. Adlin, with your knowledge and your experience and the studies that you've done, do you see anywhere else in the world, so maybe other examples or models that Canada could look at closer for situations like these? Yes, my skills are limited mainly to North America, but I do know the other labor systems elsewhere. And I think that we could look at what's being done in Europe, for example, where there are collaborative systems. But we need a much more robust system where we recognize the rights of workers, we recognize the importance of collective bargaining, and we don't use those constraining methods to undermine collective bargaining. So Sweden, Germany, they have systems that we should maybe look at closer at. Thank you.
On to Madame LaRouche for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Listen, Mr. Edlin, I just want to continue with the bill that was tabled recently in the House of Commons that was anti-strike breaker legislation. The 18-month delay I don't really understand the logic, because if it's a problem now, we have the tools to resolve that problem. So why not do it right now? So if it can work in 190 days from now, and if it works in BC and Quebec, why not in Canada at the federal level immediately? So I don't see the logic behind that delay. All right. In recent interviews in CBC, Mr. Edlin, you said that there has been less conflict, or there's been more conflict, and you identified a number of factors, especially the COVID that exacerbated the situation, the rising inequalities, job security. And you said on X that you were happy to see the labor movement that was developing in the state. So what explains the increase in the number of conflicts, and what are your solutions to reduce the number of conflicts? All right, well, as I said to the media, I see 4 factors. So first of all, the degradation of work, so the growth in inequality, stagnation of salaries, the decrease in benefits, and the pandemic shed a light on all of these in a way that we hadn't seen before. It wasn't that those problems did not exist before, it's just that we became aware of them in a new way. And then after the pandemic, what we're seeing is the labor market has given a bit more power to workers. And now we're in a period where there are more work conflicts. People are saying, okay, oh, well, it's a striking, or is an option that I have. So how to solve that? Well, we have work to do. So all those problems have developed over a 40-year period. There are strength relationships, power relationships that undermine the rights of workers over the years. So we have to catch up.
Very much, sir. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay.
But the time is up, and we have our next
Okay.
questioner. Madam Zarilla for 2.5 minutes, and that will bring us to the appropriate time to finish this part of our meeting.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And can you hear me all right? Are you hearing me, Madam Speaker?
Yes, we are, please.
Okay, great. Thank you. My question is again for Mr. Idlin. Just in regards to some of the comments you made earlier about how important it is to look at the whole economy and how people are doing, how workers and people and family are doing in an economy. So there's been much discussion that strikes like this can potentially impact in a negative way the economy. And I was wondering if you could share in your knowledge and career the benefits that have been won by unions that have improved the Canadian economy and the life of Canadians.
Yes, that's a great question. Thanks. So first of all, I want to say that we need to place the disruption of strikes in a broader context as well. And that is the day-to-day disruption of the status quo, meaning that when we're in a world of stagnating wages, of workers who can't get enough hours, or who are being forced to do too many hours, or are forced to work too many jobs, or don't have a pension, don't have job security, that creates crises and disruptions on a day-to-day basis that we don't make the headlines, but are very real problems for many Canadians. And so when we see these strikes, what they're doing is they're bringing some of this private disruption out into the open. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, more directly responding to your question about the, what unions have won. I mean, I think that, much of the standard of living that Canadian workers take for granted today, or, maybe not take for granted, but that enjoy today, is the result of labor struggles. The weekend, the 8-hour day, the healthcare system that we have. These are all things that unions fought for. Paid family leave. The postal worker strike of 1981 was critical in bringing paid family leave to the fore as a critical issue for Canadian families. And so I could go on. I think we're going to run out of time, but that just, I think it's important to recognize that these are what we think of today as sort of the things that make Canada a prosperous society are not things that were just given. They were fought for, and they were fought for by workers and their unions.
Thank you so much. And one last question for you is just this study is about the economic impacts of the port strike, Fraser Port, Vancouver Port. Is there data on the economic impact on workers, on families in the region? Is there any data available on that?
Yeah, that's. I'm unfortunately not equipped to answer that question at this point. I'm
Possibly,
sure that
sir, you could,
I could follow up later.
if you could follow up to Madam Zerillo's question and send it to the clerk,
I'd be
it would
happy
be
to.
appreciated. Thank you very much. Completed the hour that we had agreed to. Not seeing any other business here at the table, I will move adjournment.